Thank you very much. So normally at this point, when you're invited to a thing, you thank the organizers for inviting you, but after Josh's welcome, I feel the need to say a little bit more than that. It's been a long journey to come here, both in terms of the miles and in terms of the distance culturally. The journey has been made possible by the generosity of the City of Gold Coast, and I want to acknowledge that, and particularly amongst the team to Min, who has entertained my diva-ish requests for travel specials with great aplomb. And on arrival, I felt as if I was also arriving with the team from Melbourne, David and Nat and Diane, who are finding themselves at home here. And I was struck by Josh's remarks about our people and your people. My people are the Jews of North London, and we feel made welcome here. In Hebrew, when you say welcome to someone, you say bruchim haba'im, which means blessed are the comers, are the arrivers. And the correct response to that, when you're a guest who's arriving, is bruchim hanimtzaim, which means blessed are the dwellers. And I think the dwellers of Gold Coast are blessed. I've seen a fair amount of the city over the last couple of days due to the generosity of my hosts. I know that Councillor Tozer is going to be in and out because the Madrigal annual show which is taking place today. It's an agricultural show, and I'm delighted that we here in 2970 are competing with a major agricultural show for the attention of the Gold Coast citizens. And somewhere between the Strip and the hinterland, something very special is going on. There's a kind of alchemy that's happening, and it's unstabilizing. The mayor and the bayer were in evidence in our first morning here. The mayor was encountering a full-size bear during his press conference. And that destabilization, I think, has stayed with us, and we've enjoyed it. On the radio with Nicole Dyer, I talked about fault lines and the energy that they release. And she said, no, it's very stable here. And then the producer came on the screen and said, well, actually, there was a small earthquake earlier, just under 3 on the Richter scale. And so things are a little bit destabilized. But I'm here to tell you that the destabilization can be made a bit more precise than that. There is a small earthquake happening in the Gold Coast, but its magnitude is 2.970 on the Richter scale. It's going to shake things up a little bit, and I'm delighted to be here. Bruchim hanimtzaim, and thank you very much on behalf of all the speakers for welcoming us to Gold Coast. Thank you. Okay, so you've heard quite a lot of voices from the stage. Before I kick off with how art and science collide, you should hear from each other on this question. I'm going to use a technique which I'm going to tell you in advance is very slightly frustrating for you, but that's the nature of it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer the question that I'm going to then answer at greater length, which is how can art and science collide? And the question I'd like you to discuss on your tables, and very briefly say hi. You don't have time to introduce yourselves by name, but say hello to the people that you're sitting with if you don't know them yet. On your tables for 30 seconds, this is enough time to start answering the question, but not to stop answering it, not to finish. What is your favorite art-science collision, if you have one? What is your favorite art-science collision? Think back of a time in your life. Could be last night, could be just reading the program for today. What's the favorite experience that you've had in your life of art and science colliding? Answer the question for 30 seconds, and then I'll kick off properly. Okay, so like I said, that's not enough time to answer the question, but there will be plenty more time to discuss it later. Right, so let me tell you about my journey here. I'm going to give you a sense of my journey here, starting in London and working to where I am now. But on the way, I stopped off in Singapore for a day, and some of you will recognize the extraordinary building that is the Marina Bay Sands Resort there. There's a swimming pool at the top of that set of towers where I swam and looked out over the city. And you'll see at the bottom right of the image that there is a thing called the Art Science Museum. You can see it in that beautiful lettering on the right-hand side. The Art Science Museum is an interesting thing because what happened when the developers wanted to build a casino in Singapore, was they were told by the local government that they had to make some contribution to the culture of Singapore. And the contribution that the architect, Moshe Safdie, Israeli like me, suggested that they put in was an art science museum. It's the world's first art science museum, and interestingly enough, it's a condition of the gambling license that they were given by the Singapore government that this museum is present. And I speak to Gold Coast as a city of fun with the seamy side, to note that the cultural counterbalancing to that kind of cultural richness can include a conjunction between art and science. If you're transiting north from here and stop off in Singapore, I encourage you greatly to go and visit it. But also as a city to think about the value of this kind of collision to counterbalance perhaps the more commercial, the more rapacious, the greedier and more small-minded preoccupations that might lead you to build a casino in a place of beauty, and think that the collision between art and science may offer a sort of counterbalance to that. So I was delighted to visit there, and I think that the role of science and art in culture can be seen as vibrant, if only from that architectural conjunction. It's an extraordinary building, isn't it? Looks like a lotus flower above. Of course, the conjunction between art and science has long histories, so it's clear that it dates at least to Leonardo da Vinci, whose anatomical investigations of the human form and of the possibilities of technology legendarily combined art and science. I'm pleased that both of the keynotes so far in this conference have counterbalanced the Gold Coast tendency to expose the female form by using male nudity as a key element of their production so far. I'm not going to go quite as far as Stellark. My figures are facing away from the viewers, but there it is. And I did a little bit of research before I came. There's a certain amount of mystery still about what Da Vinci was aiming for in these pictures. Clearly, these are male forms in motion. But what precisely they're doing has remained a mystery for several hundred years since they were drawn in Florence. But I'm pleased to say, having reached Gold Coast, that a small amount of investigation has proven that what they're actually doing is looking for the perfect surfboard pose. Da Vinci in Florence was experimenting to find the perfect caddy, which I'm told is the term, and a riao as well, which is the surfing terms which found their origins in ancient Florence but have come to full expression in the Gold Coast. So the collisions have been with us for some time. In more recent times, I think it's still the case, and I don't know, Stellark, whether you feel the same. Whenever you're interviewed in the media about science and art, it's kind of some extraordinary surprise, right, that the scientists and the artists have found themselves together. It's as if it was something completely new each time, and that novelty is both charming and ignorant, I think. It is not the case that it's new. And as Stellark knows well, the year of my birth, 1968, saw an exhibition at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, about which more a little later, called Cybernetic Serendipity. And this was an exhibition which took the creative power of computer science and of automatic generation of form, and put it in an art space. The Institute of Contemporary Art has the word art in the title. It's an art space. But the exhibition asserted that technical domains, as one might say, computer science, mathematics, were capable of generating beauty, if not appreciating it, at least generating it. And indeed, it was at the ICA that my own career in the counterparts between art and science began. I was the world's first scientist in residence at an arts institution. And I think what I want to talk to you about today is the mechanisms and the formats by which one can engineer the kind of creative collisions that are required in this domain. So the first thing we did was to take a scientist, that was me, it wasn't my idea, and put me into an art space. And as you can imagine, I spent most of my time in the bar, right, with my mates, because that's what you do when you're given license. And the ICA bar in 2002, 3, 4, 5, and I think you'll agree with this, was the place where art and science collide. And so a good bar with a welcoming environment and a place where everybody can feel at home no matter what their origins is essential for the kinds of collisions that we're talking about. And the ICA bar is a place where different people meet. This is a picture from the preview to that exhibition, and it shows Princess Margaret meeting a man in trainers. And while that might not look particularly surprising to those of us who are now acclimatized to the Gold Coast, in London the idea that royalty would meet someone wearing trainers was still a shocking idea in 1968. And so the creative collisions are social as well as technical. And I want to come back to that point at the end, because I think that the kinds of conjunctions that we're interested in can do a lot to disrupt social structures as well. Okay? Now, I'm a neuroscientist, and so a lot of the art-science collisions that I've been involved with have been about perceiving the world. How do we see what's out there? How do our brains process information? And how can we relate the neurobiological process of seeing to the artistic one? And I just want to acknowledge that the traditions of investigation of how seeing works go back a long time. One might think of Descartes, one might think of Newton and his optics, but actually it goes much further than that. This is a 1,000-year-old picture from the Islamic scholar and I would say scientist, Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham was the first person to really think about optics. He and his contemporaries defined the refractive index, and yet it's the case when I visit the Gulf and Arab countries that even people who live in Arab countries today would date that back to Newton, who came to these discoveries 700 years after Ibn al-Haytham himself had discovered it. And why have I put this slide up? This is a drawing, as you may be able to imagine, of the two eyes that mammals, humans possess. And he's drawn, with a fair degree of schematic accuracy, the optic nerves that meet in the middle as the connections from your two eyes travel back through your skull and into the bit at the back of your head, here where visual processing is done. And Haytham asked the following question. Is seeing a process that goes into the eyes or one that comes out of the eyes? Okay, now that may seem like a silly question. I'm going to try and persuade you that it isn't. But the reason why it was a question was because there were plenty of prevalent thoughts then and through into the Renaissance and beyond that seeing was an active process, that seeing rays came out of your eyes, that they felt the world as your fingers might, they gathered sense impressions of the world, and that your visual investigation of the world was driven out from your eyes. Now, clearly from the point of view of physics, we all know that that's not true. It's photons that come into your eyes, and then the information is processed from there up into the brain. And Haytham made that argument. Al-Haytham said, if I look at the sun directly, again a Gold Coast reference, it will hurt my eyes. Clearly something is coming from the sun into my eyes, not the other way around. And so the information, the photons, are impinging upon your retina. But modern neuroscience shows that that is not the whole story. Because although it's the case that the photons are going in, if you look at the neurobiology, which is to say look at the connections in your brain, there is a hierarchy, right? There are some low-level areas of your brain that are connecting dots into lines, making lines into shapes, putting shapes into scenes, making scenes into scenarios, taking scenarios into narratives, and so on up. And that's a kind of hierarchy. And clearly the retina, the light-gathering device at the back of your eye, is at the bottom of that hierarchy. But it's a principle of neurobiology, and I hope you're going to be alive to the metaphorical richness of what I'm saying, also in terms of how we build structures, like we're supposed to be building structures today, as David has outlined, that there are as many connections between the upper areas and the lower areas as there are between the lower areas and the upper areas. It's a principle of neuroscience that if two cortical areas are connected, there are as many connections going one way as the other. Okay? And I hope I made it clear in my welcome that I'm sincere in believing that my own brief visit to the Gold Coast will provide me with as much information as I will impart to you. These processes have to be two-way if they're real, and we can learn from a neurobiological reference to that effect. But it's also the case in terms of how we see, that our seeing is a projection into the world. Our prejudices and our expectations shape the world that we see. And as you may have heard me say on the radio yesterday, those of you from Gold Coast see the waves differently than I do. When you see a wave breaking, you understand the forces of it. You know that it would be time to get onto the board and get out there, time to have another coffee. You understand. You can read the waves. You can see them. It's the same photons hitting our eyes, but you see differently because of your knowledge and expectation. And I can't resist sharing with you, early in my talk, one of the most important findings in visual neuroscience of the last 12 months. This was one which some of you may have encountered through the wonders of the interweb, the blue and black dress versus the gold and white dress. Who's not seen this picture before? Okay. Who has seen this picture before? Now, please share with the people on your table what color the dress that you're looking at is. Okay. So if you think that the dress is blue and black, please put your hand up. Okay? If you see, looking at this, a white and gold dress, put your hand up. Yeah, ooh. Now the first, it's not factional, Stella, stop doing. It's the, Now, the question is, what on earth is going on here? How can this be? Okay, because clearly the same photons are reaching your eyes, right? And incidentally, the genuine disagreement on this, I mean, when you realize that the person sitting next to you really sees it as white and gold, I find it quite an unsettling moment. I mean, it's as if aliens had inhabited. They look like us, they talk like us, but they don't see like us. Very strange. So let me explain briefly the illusion, but contextualize it first. What I want to tell you about this, my friends, is that this is a genuine story, right? There was a shop in Scotland that sold a dress. There was a woman taking a picture of the dress. She was planning to wear it for a wedding. She put it on her social media feed and said, what do you think of this blue and black dress? And her friends came back and said, you mean the white and gold one? And she was like, what? And that is genuinely what happened. It was one of the most tweeted memes of the early part of this year. But what I want to tell you is that this is a genuinely new finding in visual neuroscience, okay? So we knew of the existence of these kinds of objects, but no one had ever constructed one, okay, before. Which is kind of weird. And secondly, not only, and I'll tell you how it works in a second, not only is it novel, but it's also irreproducible, which is to say that nobody has succeeded to make another one of these. And when I say nobody, I mean the best visual neuroscientists in the world. We don't understand this. So what am I trying to tell you? That the information flows are not as you might expect. Okay? The information does come from the internet. I mean, it is mostly pictures of cats, but occasionally some real stuff filters through, and genuine findings about the world can arise. What's actually going on here in brief is the following. There is a thing called color constancy, and what color constancy allows you to do is to see colors accurately no matter what the illuminating light is, right? So this suit that I'm wearing is kind of bluey, and in this sort of slightly whitish light, this whitish-yellow light indoors, it looks blue. If we were to go outside into the bright sunshine, which we will during the coffee break, you will find that the suit will be reflecting much more white light from the sun, but you will still see it as blue because you will make a correction in your brain for the illuminating light, and you will extrapolate from that back to the genuine color of the object. This color constancy effect is very helpful for fashion designers because it enables them to be confident people see their clothes in the same light in different situations. And its origins speculatively, but probably are to do with when, as primates, we were searching for colored berries in the forest. We became very good at eating a wide range of foods, but it was quite important that we could spot the poisonous ones also at dusk. So even when there was sunset and the forest was illuminated by reddish light, we needed to be able to accurately see the color of the berries that we might or might not want to eat, that might feed us or poison us. And so this color constancy effect was solved. Now, what's going on in this picture is the following. Those of you that see the dress as blue and black, and of course you are right, I mean, or no, you're, are hypothesizing that this light is being illuminated by white light, because under white light it would look that color, okay? Those of you that see it as gold and black are hypothesizing, you don't know this consciously, that it is being lit by somewhat bluish light, okay? And if it's being lit by somewhat bluish light, the blue comes from the illumination, not the dress. Your brain automatically corrects for that, and you see the underlying color as being gold. Okay? So this strange phenomenon of color correction is a perfect example of our projecting meaning out onto the world. Seeing, my friends, is not a passive thing, it's an active thing. And our prejudices and our expectations, through the very connections of our brain, make their way out into the world and shape the reality that we see. Okay? And that's a fair, I mean, what I just said, you could take to be a statement about the neurobiology, but you can also take it to be about perception and prejudice and how we might make progress by constructing structures with people who might otherwise speak different languages than we do. Okay? So now let me tell you a pair of stories about dance, which I came to through my interest in neurobiology and seeing, but which led me through them into an understanding of the kind of structures we need to build to exploit the relationships between art and science in order to do social transformation. Shall I say that again? The structures that we need to build in order to exploit the relationships between science and art in the service of social transformation. And again, we're in a process of social transformation on the Gold Coast towards the Commonwealth Games and beyond, and towards re-establishing through Karina's fantastic policy and beyond the role of culture within the civic sense of Gold Coast. Okay? So how did I come to be engaged with dancers? I've told you about the color stuff. I've told you about how what we know about color, probably dating back to our primate ancestors, shapes how we see the world. But I became interested in movement as well. David's made me a bit nervous about the illumination, so you'll forgive me if I move aside a little bit for this one. But we were interested in how you see movement. So this is what's called the biological perception of biological motion. And this is work I did at UCL with a number of colleagues, Julie Grez, Beatrice Calvo-Marino, Patrick Haggard, and Dick Passingham. And we became interested in how your own ability to move helps you to see the movements of others. Okay? Because I was aware that when I saw dance, I saw it differently than how dancers saw it. Okay? I'm not a dancer. This will become evident in a second. But that fact of my not being able to dance changes how I see the movement. But we wondered what the underlying neurobiology of that was. And to do that, we did some experiments involving ballet dancers and capoeira dancers. Okay? And in fact, it was with Deborah Bull, who currently is the Director of Culture at King's, under which Science Gallery sits, that we made this collaboration. We took ballet dancers from the Royal Ballet and we took capoeiristas. Capoeira is a Brazilian martial art or dance form. The reason for the ambiguity is that it was developed by slaves who weren't allowed to organize into fighting forces, and so they called what they were learning a dance so that the slave owners wouldn't be upset by. And interestingly, with capoeira, you're not allowed to touch the ground with anything but your feet, your hands, and your head. That's because they were wearing uniforms, which if they got scuffed or dirty, they'd be in trouble. So there's no elbows and knees or asses on the floor in capoeira. It's all feet, hands, and heads. Capoeira is a fighting form, and it shares with ballet the following property, that you can have a phrase, in this case in Brazilian, and if you say that phrase, a capoeirista will reliably do a certain move, and the same with ballet. You have a phrase in French, which if you read it out, a dancer classically trained will do the same move. And so what we did was we made some kinematically equivalent movements. So what you're seeing there is basically a step to the left, step to the right, and a kick. And in capoeira, it comes out like the sequence down there, and in ballet, it comes to the sequence there. Okay? So what we had was these sequences of movements in these two distinct kinematic forms. We took dancers from both styles and put them in the brain scanner. Don't have time to tell you how that works really, but it's an MRI machine and it looks at blood flow within the brain. What it allows us to do is to tell which bits of the brain are more active or less active in different conditions. Okay? So now what we've got is what's called a 2x2 design. We've got two kinds of dancers and we've got two kinds of dance forms, and they're watching both in the scanner. And you'll see that for each individual subject, they're either seeing a thing they can do, so that would be a ballet dancer looking at the ballet, or a capoeirista looking at the capoeira, or they're looking at a thing that they can't do. They're either looking at a thing they can do and a thing they can't do. And the question was, which bits of your brain do you use in those two different conditions? Okay? Now, why is that interesting? Well, because when you're in the brain scanner, you're instructed to remain still. Okay? You have to do that, because otherwise you get a blurry signal. So these people are not moving. Okay? But what we found was that when you're looking at the thing that you can do, the bits of your brain that are ordinarily concerned with the control of motion, your movement cortex. Why do we call it that? Because it's the bit that if it's damaged, you can't move, right? It's movement brain. That bit of your brain is more active when you see the thing you can do than when you see the thing you can't do. So even when you are still, okay, even when you are unmoving, you are activating your movement control centers to help you understand what you're seeing. Okay? And again, we can go metaphorical with that a little bit. When I see a surfer, I can't surf. I have no idea what she's doing. Right? If you are a surfer yourself, you will feel it. Okay? It does relate also to the things some of us saw yesterday with Stellark and the piercings and the hangings. This is what's called motor resonance, but there is also a kind of physical empathy going on. Okay? That your your irrepressible resonance, the fellow feeling that you have with conspecifics, the feeling that you have when you see someone like you getting kicked or hurt or moving, it plays out in your body through the bits of your brain that control motion. And for the geeks among you, I'm delighted to show you the bits of the brain that were activated when you see the things you can do versus the bits that you can't. And I'm going to leave this picture up for a second, because what I want to say is that the outcomes of that work were some highly cited peer-review papers. So these were papers that found themselves in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience or Cerebral Cortex as a magazine. And we got to be successful scientists because people who were also doing science wrote about our papers in their scientific studies. Okay? We couldn't have done the work without Tom Sapsford, who was the choreographer, and all of the dancers. This is not something we could have done on our own in the lab, partly because they were the experimental subjects, but also because they helped us to understand what was happening in the experiments. They told us what it was like as a ballet dancer to see movement. Interestingly, and you may know this, if you're a ballet dancer, going to the ballet isn't that much fun, right? Because you see it as a technical form, right? Equally, having no knowledge of them, if you go to a Japanese dance form, most of us, we're completely lost and we get nothing out of it. It seems you need the sort of intermediate level of familiarity to really appreciate it. We'll come back to that in my very last slide. But again, I want to explain what happened in terms of social structures. We paid a choreographer and some dancers to help us do this science, okay? We generated a space where those conversations could happen. ICA Bar, right? The cultural center of the Gold Coast. A pub, right? We generated a space wherein those conversations could happen, where everybody was equal, everybody's opinions were allowed. These are people that were coming from different places, but were engaging in the middle. And then we went back into our home domains to produce the results. So the results were in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience. And Tom Sapsford went back to his choreographic career, a slightly richer man, perhaps a wiser man, but we had detached at the time of the production. Okay? So that's the story of ballet and capoeira and how you actively see the world based on your own experience. And now let me tell you a parallel story, but in the opposite direction. And this is another dance story from a dancer called Wayne McGregor, who also came to see me in 2002 at the ICA. He's the resident choreographer at the Royal Ballet. And he was working on a fabulous work called Ataxia, which ataxia is the name of a movement disorder. This is a publicity still from the shot. Perhaps I'll move back to this slide so we can take the stage lights down so you can appreciate the beauty of the images. So Wayne works with movement vocabularies. He gets his dancers to move. And how he made this piece was that he and his dancers spent a lot of time in a psychology lab, and they practiced a certain kind of distraction techniques. And in distraction techniques, what happens is that there are certain things you can do while moving, right? So counting backwards from 100 to 199, 98, 97, 96, I can continue to move. But if you count backwards from 100 in 13s, okay, that disrupts your movement. And he worked with a psychologist to find ways of getting people to move that were disrupted by the exercises they were doing. And what he enabled through this process was for his dancers to lose control of their bodies. And I'm showing you some of the publicity shots from Ataxia. The dancers lost control of their bodies in the psychology lab by doing these exercises. And from this, Wayne produced a new movement vocabulary. And using that palette, that set of moves, which had never been done before, he created the piece Ataxia, which went on to premiere at Sadler's Wells. Okay? And I have to say, having seen it, it was extraordinary. The movements that the bodies were doing were like none I'd ever seen. So that by the end, and just for fun, Wayne put in a point where one of the dancers just went like that, and it was as if I was seeing that arm movement for the first time. My whole brain had become adjusted to these extraordinary jerky movements so that just a normal reach seemed alien. So he really had messed with our heads in terms of how he did that. Now, this piece of dance that he produced was at Sadler's Wells, which is a major dance space within London, and was reviewed by the dance press. Okay, it got a review in The Guardian. People liked it. And in fact, there was no neuroscientific or other product from this collaboration. Okay? So to map it out for you again, what Wayne did, he took himself a choreographer and some dancers. He took some psychologists. They spent 3 months in the studio in Cambridge doing all of these experiments in this shared space where everything was okay, where all the borders were down. I call this, incidentally, the Dionysian frenzy, right? Or if you like, the orgy model of interdisciplinary collaboration. There is a point, if you're doing it right, where you kind of lose a sense of who's doing what to whom, okay? And that's kind of essential for these collaborations to be taking place. You need to make those spaces and you need to facilitate them right, okay? Having done that, though, everybody needs to find their clothes again, even Stellark, to dress up and to leave and to go back to their day jobs. And so in a sense, this convergent-divergent interdisciplinary collaboration is at the heart of success here. We need spaces where we can work together, but we need to go back to our home spaces in order to define what we do. Okay? And so in that sense, the performance at Sadler's Wells, okay, and the reviews that they produced there, or the papers that we published to great acclaim in the Journal of Cerebral Cortex or Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience were the outcomes, back in conventional domains. And so therefore, when we say we want to remove interdisciplinary boundaries, we're not saying down with disciplines, right? For myself, we're not saying we are all artists. I mean, with all respect, and it's a term which is used a lot, I don't believe we are all artists. I don't believe we are all scientists. Stella was helpful in pointing out, as it's clear to many of us, he's not a scientist. He's interested in this stuff, but that's not what he does. We have different disciplines and different domains, but we do need spaces where we can work together. And that's the essence of interdisciplinarity, which all of our work has shown. Okay? So now, how are we building that in Science Gallery London? Let me tell you about the structure that we're building. And again, I'm telling you this story partly because I'm incredibly proud of it and very excited. And I'm going from Gold Coast to Melbourne, where there will be a science gallery built through the University of Melbourne. And the sort of structures I'm about to tell you seem to be popping up all over the place. There may be one in Bangalore quite soon. There may be one in Singapore. The original one was in Dublin. But let me tell you about Science Gallery London. Science Gallery is a space where art and science collide. It's going to be built at the base of the Shard, some of you know, is a rather tall building in London, and it's aimed at 15 to 25-year-olds, which is an interesting demographic. As I said on the radio yesterday, they can't be told, the 15 to 25-year-olds. I mean, they sort of know it all already. But they are very interested in their own identities. Right? The process of self-definition as a 15 to 25-year-old, of whether you're the same as the people around you or others, whether you're the same as what you were a year ago or not, is very important. And that's why it's an exciting group to work with. There's no permanent collection at Science Gallery. Everything is driven through seasons of activity. And I'll show you a couple of things from a season we did before the building opened. So we're opening in 2017, but we're running these pre-opening seasons. Season was called Frequencies. And what happens with the season at Science Gallery is that the engagement begins 6 months to a year before the work is shown. Okay? So for the 6 months to a year before, we spoke to local young people, to scientists, to artists, to workers of various kinds, to researchers, and we asked them what the rhythms of their life were like. It was a season about how sounds can capture the rhythms of your life. It's not that it's community art, right? There is an open call for proposals, but what's produced is professionally commissioned. But the agenda for what's shown, the curatorial agenda, is driven by the audience. You go out honestly in the 6 months to a year before you do the work, and you say, what do frequencies mean to you in your life? And from that process, you then curate a bunch of scientific exhibits and demonstrations and visualizations, but also performance, visual art, sculpture, and those are woven into a season of activity of about 3 months' duration. Okay? So first, what I want to show you is a pair of collaborations, and I'm going to show you first the image of the workshop process. So what we have here is a bearded fella from the Sorchestra ensemble. They play saws like you would play a stringed instrument. So it's a bow that you'd use to play a cello, but you play a saw as well. And a student midwife from St. Thomas's Hospital. And they were exploring the rhythms of birth and making music for a saw from it. And the performance that gave rise to, we showed at the opening of Frequencies. This is Sorchestra in full swing. If you look on, we'll tweet it, but there is a YouTube channel which has a lot of this content, and we can play some of it in the interval if you like. But that resulted in some fabulous sounds. And these were performed in a space next to the hospital. So we invited other midwives, patients, local residents in to hear the music that was generated from the rhythms of, I'm pleased to say not the actual sort of screams and cursing, but the rhythms of birth. And the other one I want to tell you about briefly is with the fabulous artist Bishi. She's of Bengali origin and had her own sleep waves digitized in a sleep lab. It's a pediatric neurophysiology lab. That's a lab that studies the sleep patterns of children. And she had a disrupted night deliberately and then went to sleep the next morning in the sleep lab. And her own sleep waves were digitized. By the way, can I tell you in terms of the results of art-science collaboration, the guy who runs the lab loves these collaborations because when you're running a lab like this, you need volunteers and subjects. You need them to come in. And also you need them to come back. Right, so you record them once, but you need to do a follow-up 3 months later and 6 months later. And he finds that by collaborating with artists and putting his work out there, it's easier for him to recruit subjects, and the data he gets from them is better, and they come back for the follow-up visits because they're engaged with the project. So back in the pediatric neurophysiology lab, he's delighted by the collaboration. And what Bishi came up with was a setting of Shakespeare's Sonnet 43, which is all about sleep, where the music was generated from her own sleep patterns. And she performed this in Guy's chapel, the chapel of the hospital, with some beautiful images from Susan Aldworth in the background. This was a concert that we sold out for 2 sittings, 250 seats each, without any significant publicity. Because she has a following of her own, Bishi is the Eric Clapton of the sitar, as you can probably see from that image. The sitar is the Indian guitar that you can see slung at the bottom. She plays it through electric guitar pedals and produces the most extraordinary sounds. And so this collaboration resulted in a piece of incredibly high-quality music, art, high quality in its own terms, reviewed by the music critics. And what do I know? I'm just a neuroscientist. But the curators and the audience loved it in its own terms, but driven from world-leading science as well. And so from this process of collaboration and workshopping, we produced these high-quality products. Let me say one other thing before I finish about how we do this. We're into social justice and we're into empowerment, and what I mean by that is that by the kind of loosening of interdisciplinary boundaries that Science Gallery and art science projects themselves produce, this opens up a space where non-experts can speak. Okay? The loosening of these boundaries opens up a space where non-experts can speak. So here is another one of the workshops we did. You can't tell who the neuroscientist is in that image, can you? Actually, it's the woman at the back with her hand out. And she did a workshop with some local young people from Southwark about things called earworms. Earworms are songs that get into your head and that you can't get rid of, you know, when you've got a track in your tune. It's a direct translation from the German, the earworm. And they were investigating and, in fact, composing their own earworms. You'll hear one of them in a second. But by having a workshop on this genuine topic of neuroscientific interest, but that was driven by a bunch of local young people whose input into it was genuinely of interest to the neuroscientists, the participation that they had in the space was not just turning up to a lecture and being told about the structure of their brains, but actively contributing to research. Okay? So their involvement in this project was as participants, as shapers of the research, and of subjects, and they were seeing it in their own terms. And the final trick that we played, which I think is I will say this, I think is clever, and I offer it to you, as a gift. It's a very powerful technique, and this was called the media team. So everything we do in Science Gallery is covered by a group of 15 to 25-year-olds who are early-stage bloggers, video makers, YouTubers, and have their own early-stage professional practice. So here's a pair of them, the Mandeville sisters. This is a pair of sisters from South London, 15 and 17 years old. They've got 30,000 subscribers to their YouTube channel, and their films that they have on their YouTube channel are the kinds of films that you would expect 15 and 17-year-olds from South London to make. They're about makeup and nail polish and mispronouncing the names of boy bands, and they are entirely banal and trivial, exactly as the cultural outputs of that generation ought to be. But they produce it with extraordinary style. This is a lovely shot of them in Borough Market, which is the food market next to Science Gallery. And the clever thing that we did was to hand over control of the documentation of the season to that group. So the media team are the official documenters. This is not the youth project, my friends. This is the project. They are the official documenters of the process. And I'm going to show you, technology willing, a video which they made, the 15 to 25-year-olds made, which documented the collaborations I've been describing. And as you'll see, they've shot it and edited it in their own style. So let's see how that goes. That's what happens when you leave the 15 to 17-year-olds in charge, and it's fantastic. And by letting them take control of the discourse, we're making a very strong statement, which is that the power is with the audience, and they're setting the agenda. I've got some pictures of Science Gallery to show you, but in order to allow ourselves to have time to have the discussion before the break, I'm going to flick through those quite quickly. And conclude by saying that this cafe that we're building at the heart of Science Gallery will be the most exciting science art space in the Northern Hemisphere, dare I say. It's a place where art and science will collide because everybody's voices will be equal and will be heard. And I commend to you the model of empowering the people that you want to work with here in Gold Coast and beyond, to let them set the agenda and to let them help you generate the space where these kinds of collisions can take place. And if you do that, then the expertise that happens at the heart of these collaborations will gain in power for itself and allow itself to be held by the audience. I'll leave you with this image of dance in suspension, which we can talk about more in the break, and tell you why the title is Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein Meet in a Bar. The joke is that they met at the premiere of City Lights, is the film, and the crowd went wild. They were both very famous men by this point. And Chaplin says to Einstein, you know, they're applauding me because they understand everything I do, and they're applauding you because they understand nothing that you do, right? And that tension between knowledge and ignorance, right, is at the heart of everything we do. If we're going to genuinely collaborate, we have to listen to the people who know nothing about what we do, and we have to listen to the people who know everything, who are the experts, and we have to find spaces where both of their voices can be heard. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, I've been told that there is a little bit of time for questions, and I bow formally to my esteemed colleagues in moderation to decide whether we're going to do, how long we're going to go. But I'd be delighted to continue the discussion with you. I'll move to the center of the stage. There are roving mics, and I think for recording purposes, it's probably a good idea if we use them. Should we take the gentleman just there? And anyone else who wants to speak, give a twitch now, and we'll get the next mic to you. Okay. Sir.
Daniel, please excuse me for not standing. I'm got a form of Parkinsonism, which creates, as you know, challenges for movement, but also for vision for me. And today's talk has actually been a defining moment for me, an absolutely defining moment, because with respect to vision, my peripheral vision is sort of closing in, but I'm finding I have an acuity for colour and beauty that I never had before. Now, I don't know whether that is a psychological aspect of my life being turned upside down and now seeing life in a simpler and more beautiful form, or whether it's something biological. And with respect to movement, I found it very interesting when you were saying how we see movement. I've been involved with a program called Dance for Parkinson's,
yes,
and which is a great program. And anyone on the Gold Coast who's got money that could help us bring it to the Gold Coast, please do, because Queensland Ballet will come and do it for us, and we have a large population with Parkinson's on the Gold Coast.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's a really strong pair of observations you've made. The Dance for PD program is extraordinary among many other interventions which use cultural forms for rehabilitation and, in fact, for, I wouldn't say cure, but for amelioration of the heart of the symptoms. And we're only beginning to understand how it works, but the phenomenon is quite interesting. People, whether through stroke or Parkinson's, it's quite a general effect, who have restrictions in movement. And there's an even more interesting example for me of aphasia, people who are unable to speak. Okay, there's a beautiful film of a bloke who can't, and he does the syllables but not any of the sounds. And they have a conversation with him, and at a certain point the experimenter goes, are you able to count? And he goes, so why don't you try it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right, in other words, the speech centers were completely gone, but for this little bit that was the counting center, and that was retained. And it's similarly for Parkinson's, possibly for motivation reasons, that people who are unable to move in normal circumstances, when the dance music comes on and the dance, it's different. It's transformative. So we're just beginning to understand that, and the rehabilitatory benefits of it are not conditional on understanding it, right? And it works even if we don't know how, okay? To the point about peripheral vision, that's totally right, sir. So you don't see color in the periphery. The edge of your vision is black and white. You can check that, incidentally. It's the only card trick you can play on yourself. So you take a pack of cards, try this at home, pick a card, any card, but just don't show it to yourself. Look forwards and take the card here, and if you waggle it and bring it slowly round, what you'll discover is that from about here I can see there's something, but I can't see whether it's a red card or a black card. And I move it round and round and round, and it's only when it reaches about here that I can see whether it's red or black, okay? And the number it is, I can't really see till about here, okay? That's because the detectors in your retina at the edges only see black and white, okay? The color and high acuity centers are only in the center. But what's interesting is you don't see the edges of the world in black and white. The edges of the world look colored to you, and that's because you're projecting the color that you see in the center out to the rest. So the kind of richness that you're talking about of perception, you've become aware of as your condition has changed, but actually it's true for all of us. And maybe there's a thought there as well that, I won't say disability, sir, but changes in life can reveal things that others cannot see. So I think that there is something definitely going on there. Lady behind, yes.
Well, thank you. And I can't say it as eloquently, but welcome to the Gold Coast. You mentioned that the Art and Science Museum was maybe the best in the Northern Hemisphere. Does that mean that you have a kindness in your heart for our Hope to Gold Coast Science and Technology collision in Mudgeerbar?
I would be delighted if Councillor Tozer's vision were realised. And when I met with Glenn a couple of days ago, I discovered that he uses a trick that I use as well, and I'll commend that trick to you. Whenever I commission stuff or produce stuff, I have a very specific idea of what it is I want. Very, very specific. So when I employ people or commission people, I say, this is what I want. It's got to be this, 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 and this. And very often the people who know me, they come back 2 months later with something completely different. And they say, is this what you wanted? And I say, yes. That's exactly what I wanted. Now, why do I say that? Because I think if you have a general and a woolly vision when you're commissioning, it doesn't bring out the best in people. What you need is a specific vision, but you also need the kind of looseness to appreciate whatever comes back. So those of you that don't know, Councillor Tozer has commissioned an architect to build a mock-up of this building for which he has no money, no site, no permission, no content, no timescale, right? But he has got a building. Right? And you can fly through it on Google Earth. Again, commensurate with Councillor Tozer and indeed the Gold Coast's ambitions. The presentation begins with the entire planet and zooms into Gold Coast. And I think the specificity of that is very strong. We can talk more about it, but I think it's a very nice idea, and the connections he particularly thinks between local entrepreneurs and innovators with the presentation of the science is, I think, novel and certainly very interesting. So no, I wish it all joy. Yes, any on this side? Ma'am, please.
Hello. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm a curator working here on the development of the cultural precinct, and I think this rise of the artist-science collaborations is something that I've had a curatorial interest for a long time, and I think it's we're well placed here to deal with it. I think, and I just wanted your comment on, do you think there is a rise as well in that, I guess, the corruption around the value systems of high art, you know, the whole rise of the juggernaut of the art fairs, and I guess the distancing of, you know, those extreme values that place that kind of art in one area, and you know, the kind of art-science collaborations that are actually doing this kind of meeting point between people in very direct ways is I guess providing another, I guess, a third wedge into people's engagement with creative practice?
It's a great question, and it's one that we should kind of take to the pub. I mean, there's a lot to discuss there. I think my esteemed colleague Stellock and I disagree slightly on this. I think that that there's always been patronage, right? That art has always been paid for by people with resources, from the Medicis, you know, through to the fascist projects of the mid-part of the 20th century, which co-opted art in the service of their, I would say, nefarious projects. And the suspicion which has succeeded the totalitarian artistic direction has come through to a sort of fear of the idea that the people who pay for the art should have ideas about it. I think that where we are with high art and how it's paid for and the space it takes in the cultural sector is interesting, right? I mean, I think that these temples to art, like Tate Modern in Britain, are beautiful places, but they're places that require a certain kind of behavior from their visitors, okay? So when free entry to national museums was brought in the UK about 10 years ago, the numbers of people attending the museums doubled, but the demographic didn't change. Okay? And for me then, building these palaces to high art, where you're not supposed to touch and you're supposed to keep quiet and to reverentially engage with the products of your masters, is not necessarily the only model that we want to be following in terms of participation and engagement. We're not trying to make everybody like the fine art connoisseurs. And I would say the same about science, that we don't just want to have people worshipping scientific truth at the altar of scientific certainty, but we want to generate experiments and experimental conditions where everybody's agenda can be heard. Okay? And the art-science collaborations are a way of loosening the stranglehold of truth, which can be held by municipal, corporate, or cultural forces. That's a slightly wordy and brief answer. I think it's an interesting space, and I think disruption is really at the heart of what we're trying to do here. I welcome all disruption, he says, leaning off the front of the stage. Stella, did you want to say something?
Only to say that you eloquently balanced those concerns just then in your closing statements. But just to add to that sort of general concern, which you eloquently expressed, is on the one hand, yes, you have the high art, you know, the biennales, the works that depend on scale and excess for their impressive presence. On the other hand, though, my concern with art science is that science shouldn't be seen as authenticating arts practice, which is often the concern in institutional practices in universities, and you know that somehow, you know, if you're engaging in the kind of higher concerns of science, that authenticates the sort of messiness of art. But I think the way Daniel has kind of phrased it as a collision of art science where you open up spaces of unexpected interactions, I think that's the best way to kind of perhaps phrase that kind of collaboration. But I am sort of being now complicit in an institution. I've become fully aware of these sorts of problematics. But I equally share your concern about kind of high art and the excess and scale that some of these artworks are being produced, but conceptually and in terms of interrogating anything other, you know, it's a really shallow and uninteresting kind of presence.
They're not going to make you Vice Chancellor anytime soon, are they, in the university? No. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone wants to make a comment. Yes, gentleman there. Thank you.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much. I'm from Feral Arts. We get an interest in arts and dyslexia, and the stats that we've heard are 17% of the general population have some experience of dyslexia or different learning capacities. But some research suggests it's much higher for the arts and cultural sector. I just wanted to ask your opinion, does the artistic brain think differently?
It's a really good question, and in the time available to me, the best answer I can give you is no, but also yes. I mean, so it's clear that the cultural products of people with artistic training and indeed funding and the kinds of collaborations that are important are different than others, right? I mean, and we must recognise that difference, okay? But we don't have good evidence of the neurobiology behind that. People are very struck by dyslexia. There are certain studies of people who've had strokes and have developed extraordinary painting abilities. There is other accounts of synesthesia, which is the involuntary ability to see colours and hear sounds at the same time, or that certain kinds of words make particular colours, or that numbers have certain kinds of texture. But there seems to be no evidence of a higher occurrence of that amongst artists than scientists, or artists than others. So as far as we can see, art builds on a set of human capacities of which we're all capable, and builds on systems which can be disrupted in a number of different diseases, but is not itself a pathology. It's just reminiscent of some others. But it's still an active area of study. My friends, my time is kind of up. Can I commend the journey of art and science to you? And thank you again for inviting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Glaser.